Today I'm going to be taking a look at a laptop that is very well taken care of with all of its original documents and manuals and all of that stuff from the year 2008. This is a $1,400 laptop, which is a very high price for a laptop, and well, we're gonna see if you got your money's worth out of it, because $1,400 is a lot. Can you do anything with it in 2022? Who knows? Let me just look over here. So the laptop is a HP Pavilion DV7-1183CL. They couldn't have picked a shorter name, could they have? It has a Core2 Duo P7350 at 2 GHz, a Nvidia 9600M with a space GT at the end of it. So is that like a GT 710? I don't know. Two GB sticks to make a total of 4 GB of DDR2 400 MHz, 800 MHz I mean. Two 250 GB hard drives, though one of the hard drives is switched out with an SSD because all my games are on the SSD. And a 1440 by 900 screen, which is a quite interesting size for a screen, but hey, it looks nice, so that's fine. So with this laptop, I have pretty much everything, from all of the interesting things that came in the box with it, to the whole laptop itself. And I've noticed something very interesting in the original packaging. There is a never opened TV remote for the laptop. Yeah, you can watch TV with it. Or, I guess it's for the DVD player, but you know, there is a DVD player remote control for the laptop. I have another HP Pavilion, which is in a lot worse shape, and I think it has one of those as well. Another thing that came with the laptop that was never opened is a special laptop cleaning thing to get rid of your human hand sludge off of the laptop. So that's something. Except the laptop is going to turn right back into a human hand sludge mess, but that's fine. And yes, I had to make it much more weird than it had to be. New shirt time. So here's a look of what the laptop looks like. It's actually in very good condition. When I say in very good condition, I mean there's no scratches anywhere. Granted, I have chipped some of the paint off the screws on the bottom of the laptop, but besides that, it is in pristine condition, especially for how old it is. Also, here's a quick look at all of the ports on the laptop, just if you want to know what the ports are. It has a lot of ports. There's just one big downside. So if you use the mouse with your right hand, well, there is the USB ports. They're on the right side of the laptop. Why is that a problem? Because every time you move the mouse around, you jam your hand into the USB ports with the USB plug in it. Yeah, that's not gonna last that long, unless you're very careful. Luckily, they do have at least one USB port on the opposite side of the laptop, but that really does seem like a design flaw, or something. It's quite annoying. So I'm not a very big fan of using trackpads in general, but this is gotta be the worst trackpad I've ever used. For one reason, the materials that they made the trackpad out of. What did they do to make it so bad, you might be wondering? Well, it's basically like a mirror or a piece of glass, and if your finger has a little bit of oil on it, it kind of just sticks to the trackpad, and then it feels very uncomfortable and like pulling on your skin when you move it around and trying to move your cursor around. And also, sometimes it makes noises as well when you try to move your hand around it. Maybe if your fingers weren't sweaty or oily, that might help. But still though, that is very annoying. If they made it out of any material that was slightly less contacty like that, it would be a much better trackpad. Or maybe if it was a bit rougher, that would help out quite a bit. To boot the laptop into Windows 10 64-bit, it took 36 seconds with the 500GB Samsung 870 EVO, which is pretty decent. It's probably one of the fastest booting laptops I have, besides the server laptop which I showed in a previous video. So that's not half bad, especially for its age. Web browsing works pretty good on the laptop as long as you don't throw 98,000 tabs at it at the same time, or you don't have 98,000 tabs open at the same time. It's going to do just fine opening one or two tabs, as long as your internet can keep up, of course. So yeah, opening tabs, going and opening websites, it does perfectly fine. Yes, occasionally when you're loading up more intensive websites, the CPU does hit 100% and stay there for a while, but it's definitely not unusable, so I'd say it passes. And for 1080p YouTube or just music in general, the laptop passes even better. None, when I say none, I do mean none of my laptops have nearly as good speakers. It even beats the speakers on my desktop, to a point, which is bonkers to a point. Yes, a laptop beating desktop speakers. Yes, I know my speakers are not the best speakers in the world, they're from around the year 1998, but still though, on a laptop, that is insane. It has like one of those subwoofing things as well, and yeah, it's a very fancy system. Now, there is one downside of this. When the CPU is being used 100%, the speakers do start to glitch out. I think that is because the audio driver is not in the highest priority for some reason. I don't know why, but I think that might be the cause. But yeah, I'd say it does awesome at playing sound. So the first game on the list of games I'm going to be testing is GTA 5, and at 720p on the normal settings, or I guess GTA wise it's the low settings, it was getting a whopping 10 frames per second. Yeah, I wasn't actually expecting it to get 10 frames per second. That's actually a bad thing because I was expecting it to get over 40. I was expecting it to average out around 49. So, yeah, I am 40 frames per second off, and it's nearly unplayable. But on half resolution, it's actually a little bit better. So, half resolution is 360p, and it was getting around 15 to 20 frames per second. It's not completely playable, but if you're just a casual player, you might get along with it just fine. I was able to play it for about half an hour, and I mean, I didn't achieve anything. The world was glitching in and out because of the 2-core CPU, but it worked, and it wasn't so slow it was unbearable. It might be unbearable after a long time of playing, though. I don't know. I haven't played it for a long time at those frame rates, but yeah, that's at least from my experience so far with it. The next game up on the list is BioShock Infinite, and this one also surprised me in a bad way. I was expecting the game to run probably around 30 frames per second on the low settings at 720p, because it's an older game. Nope, I was quite wrong. At least it was running, but it was getting around 20 frames per second or less at 720p at the very low settings. So, not very good. Then I tried to set the resolution in Windows to 800 by 600. The reason why is because in the game, it only lets you take the resolution down to 720p. So I was thinking, if I can change it in Windows, maybe it might actually run better if it actually fits the screen correctly. Well, it didn't fit the screen correctly, but it was worth a try. And if I set the game to full screen, 720p, while I have Windows 10 at 800 by 600, it just puts the game at 720p and doesn't run it at 800 by 600 like I want. Then I tried to overclock the graphics card by basically maxing out the memory clock and the core clock in MSI Afterburner, and it actually did help out quite a bit. It was getting around the cinematic frame rate, or 25 to 24-ish, though it was hitting 30 at times, but still not ideal. But, you know, if you're not trying to do PvP or anything, I'd say it is playable. The next game up on the list is Fall Guys on the absolute low settings at 360p, and the game was running at a pretty unplayable frame rate, a insanely stuttery 15 frames per second at the best. It'd be super rare to non-existent if you hit 20 frames per second. So yeah, I would say the game is not very playable. Also, I'd like to mention that, surprisingly, even though it's a laptop, the CPU is actually the humongous bottleneck here, because the graphics card is barely being ran at all. When I say that, it's around 60% in most games. So I would say it'd be nice if the computer or laptop came with a faster CPU, like a quad core, like the Core2 Quad. But again, this is the year 2008, can't ask for too much. And yes, I am aware in Fall Guys the graphics card does get maxed out at sometimes, but it's still not a very good experience. And in CSGO, at 720p on the very low settings, it was getting around 15 to 20 frames per second as well. So, not very good. And again, the CPU was basically maxed out the entire time, which didn't help it. And at 640 by 480, it was slightly more playable. It was getting between 15, okay, 11 at times, but around 15 to 30 frames per second. Still though, it would be nice if it had a quad core. So I would say for the average player, CSGO is actually not playable. For me, I could probably get away with it because I'm used to playing at low frame rates. And also, I'm not a very good player either, so at least for me, there's not really much of a difference. But I do prefer the better frame rate though. Team Fortress 2 ran at around 25 to 30 frames per second, which is not great, but it did run somewhat decently. I would say if you were to play for a few minutes, you'd be just fine, but if you're trying to play this competitively, or at least trying to get a few wins, I would highly suggest not playing at 1440 by 900 resolution. But it did run. 720p was running basically exactly the same. And also, I should add, it was a nicely stuttery experience as well. The next game not on the list is Apex Legends. The game is such a legend it didn't even launch, probably because it doesn't support DirectX 10. The next game up on the list is a Minecraft Java 1.19 with the Fabric mod, OptiFabric, Fabric API, and Optifine. Optifine and OptiFabric are the same thing, you just need OptiFabric to use Optifine on Fabric. Either way, the game was running at a very stuttery 20 to 30 frames per second, occasionally going into the 40s. Now, I did find a way to actually limit the frame rate, not by using the in-game frame rate limiter, because if you use the in-game frame rate limiter, it actually makes the game really stuttery, and I don't know, this frame rate graph is going constantly, and you actually feel it quite a bit in the game. Well, if you go over and get Rivia Tuner and limit the frame rate to, let's just say, 32 in there, the little frame rate graph is relatively flat, but like, you know, occasionally, yeah, there is a stutter, but not that bad. Then I tried out Sodium and Iris combined, and it ran about the same, though there was one different thing. It stuttered like crazy. And I find this very, very often with a lot of my computers. With the Sodium mod, it does make it run a little bit better with graphics cards. So if the graphics card's holding your computer back with shaders, yes, Sodium helps. But when it comes to the CPU-wise, my Core2 Duo, Core2 Quad, the Pentium G7400, they all stutter with Sodium, more than with Optifine, especially when loading in chunks. Minecraft Bedrock is probably a better option, I thought, and I was correct. So on Minecraft Bedrock, with the default settings, the game was getting around 30 frames per second. But the thing is, the default recommended settings for the computer is insane, okay? It's like 16 chunks render distance. And the higher settings, that is absurdly high expectations for this laptop. Well, I mean, I wouldn't have thought they'd be absurd until I started testing it, but still though, like, yeah, it's not gonna work. Also, with these high settings, there was a lot of latency between you moving the mouse and your player actually moving, which basically made the game nearly unplayable. But when I changed the settings from the high to the low settings with 8 chunks render distance, the game ran much better. It was getting around 60 frames per second, hitting Bedrock's 60 frames per second limit, and there was no latency when you move the mouse. So low settings is a lot better for this, and it was perfectly playable. Roblox Arsenal at 1440 by 900 resolution on the lowest Roblox settings and the lowest in-game settings as well. It was getting a very stuttery 20 frames per second. Yes, I got a few people out in the game. I came in 10th place, but still though, the game's not exactly that playable, especially with how many stutters it has everywhere, and also like 20 frames per second is not ideal in an FPS game like this. So for Roblox, I would say maybe the lighter games it might run, but at least with this game, which is one of the worst performing games in the entire selection of Roblox that I can find, it's not very playable at all. And the next thing I was wondering is, how good is the battery life on this? Yes, I'm aware the battery is likely incredibly degraded because of the age of the laptop, but I figured, why not, you know? So on the lowest power setting in Windows, which is Power Saver, and just doing some light usage like opening Discord, typing some messages, and watching YouTube, with the medium screen brightness and around 85% volume on the laptop, the computer lasted 85 hours? What did I just say? The computer lasted 56 minutes, not 85 hours. How did I mix those up? I don't know. Nothing even is related with 85 hours. Okay, whatever. It lasted 56 minutes. Not great, but, you know, for how old the battery is, I'd say it did pretty good. If you replace the battery with a new one, it probably could last, what, 2 hours? 3 hours? I don't know. But I'd say it did really well. Also, I am actually pretty impressed in this laptop, and upgradability on it is questionable. So there's actually not one, not two, but 3 of those slots you can put a Wi-Fi card in. And I actually have something called, if I'm not mistaken, it's called the Beast. And it makes it possible so you can plug a normal graphics card slot into one of those little slots where you can plug the Wi-Fi card in. And you can basically plug any graphics card in, like an HD 5450, GT 710, RTX 3060, RTX 3090 Ti, RX 6950 XT, basically any graphics card you want, into that, and just power it with an external power supply, and you can have a external graphics card. It's not going to perform like it would normally, but it still does work. So you can do that. You can also change the storage if you want, and you can put 2 different storage types in it if you want, and you can actually upgrade the CPU. Yeah. Maybe. Okay, so from what I can tell, you can actually just upgrade it to a different Core 2 Duo. But I have seen some places where they actually might have gotten a Core 2 Quad working in it. I don't know if it will work or won't work. I don't know if I'll try it or not. But if I can find a socket P478 Core 2 Quad for maybe $3 or $4, I might pick it up and give it a try just to see if it works, you know? Because this doesn't need a better graphics card, this needs a better CPU out of anything. Also, about the graphics card, you can actually upgrade the graphics card in this too. Let me look over here. So, on eBay, alright, you can actually get graphics cards like this. It is, so the graphics card in here is not actually soldered, it's actually a card. The card is called MXM2. Whatever that means. Or not the card, but like the card type. So, yeah, MXM2. Now, they are not a good price. They are about $50 for the graphics card we got, which is the 9600M GT. But I'm sure there's other graphics cards as well that use the same slot that might cost maybe a bit more, but provide, hopefully, more performance. But at that price, I mean, it's not really worth it. But if you like tinkering, that is a quite nice thing you could do. And also, I'm going to be replacing my Lenovo G530 laptop with this. The reason why is just, this has a lot better speakers. Yes, it can also play more games, but I actually don't really care too much about the gaming performance on it. But speaker-wise, I do want the better speakers. Because all I really use the laptop for is playing back YouTube. Also, recently I got challenged from someone to make the best $500 computer out of brand new components as I possibly can. And I am wondering what you can do as well, just to see. what can you actually build for $500? So I'm curious to hear what your parts list would be for a $500 brand new computer. The computer has to, of course, include the CPU, motherboard, power supply, case, hard drive, RAM, and the GPU. And all has to be for under $500. I'm very curious to see what you come up with. Thanks for watching, have a great day.